Hello, my name's Amy and welcome to another Write a Novel with Me video in which I take you from start to hopefully finish of writing an epic fantasy book. Now, the last time I made one of these videos, I think it might have been this time last year. So that would be December of 2019. And honestly, for a while, I did wonder if I was just not going to be making any more of these videos, for the simple fact that I wasn't working on the book I've been talking about. I realised back in about March of 2020 that I didn't really have enough time for it. I had too many other projects on my plate. But then in the second half of this year, I realised that if I didn't start working on this particular book, I was not going to have any fantasy coming out over the next couple of years. I'm about to wrap up a steampunk adventure series. I finished my last fantasy trilogy last year, and a lot of the other projects I had going on were either science fiction or urban fantasy. But I decided I wasn't completely happy with that because fantasy is my first love in fiction and it's the main thing I write. So I didn't want to go so long without working on any fantasy, and crucially without publishing any fantasy. So I am officially working on this book again. So I'm sitting down with my cup of tea and I'm here to update you all on where this project stands. I have made quite a bit of progress since I last made one of these videos, but there is still a long way to go. So let's get caught up on the story itself. Last time I made one of these videos, I was trying to meld together two different stories. One was called Scion of Shadow, and the other had the working title of Aeons. I'd decided that both books fit really nicely in a very big setting I've been working on called Eterna, or the Eternal World. Not only that, but I realised that the two stories could actually become one book. Now, I agonised over this for weeks. I didn't really know if I was making the right decision or if I was just turning two relatively straightforward stories into one overly complicated one. To be honest, it could have gone either way. I could have tried to meld these two stories together and just made a massive mess. By the end of January 2020 though, I thought I was coming to some solutions. Essentially, the main characters of Aeons and the main characters of Scion were on two opposing sides of the same war. And in fact, they're being dragged into what is essentially a rerun of a war that has been going on for millennia. I'm calling this the Mythic War, and if you watched my NaNoWriMo videos, you will have heard me refer to that name. It's possibly going to be the name of the entire series. Right now, it's just working as a good working title. So we are now working with a lot of main characters. In my last video, I think I talked quite a bit about a thief called Pearl, who is very heavily invested with shadow magic. She is a main point of view of Mythic War. She's definitely a main character and will continue to be throughout the series. She has now got a partner who starts off as an enemy, who is called Shrike, who is allied with the god of death. And on the other side, moving across from Aeons, we have got four main characters. We have got Zeke, Tally, Sida, and Rowan. These four are all students at a big college in the city of Dalmouth. And as a very brief aside, the college has been so much fun to write. It is quite strange and a bit chaotic, and I'm definitely drawing from Gormenghast by Mervyn Peake as a major inspiration here. As for the Mythic War itself, this started millennia ago when 8 powerful individuals tried to supplant the 8 major gods. Only 2 of the individuals, who I'm calling the Mythics, were successful. Shadow and Death took over from the original gods of Shadow and Death, but the other 6 Mythics were imprisoned and have been trying to free themselves and essentially get revenge on the Mythics who betrayed them ever since. which means that this is another revenge story. I write these a lot. Revenge comes up as a central character motivation in so many of my stories, and I don't seem to be able to stop writing it. Here it's a little bit different though, because none of the main characters want revenge. This is more woven into the backstory and the history of the setting. Now, there is a lot more of the story I could talk about here because I have worked a lot more of the setting and the characters and the story out. I've got this giant notebook which is full of notes, and I've been using this one to work on Aeons ever since about 2015 or 2016. It has now taken all the notes for Mythic War as well. I'm not going to do a flip through of this book today though. I would like to, because I would like to talk over my thought processes for how this story has developed and where it's going. But quite frankly, this video is going to be long enough already and I just don't have time to go through the notebook today. So look out for that in the next video. So let's talk about the actual mechanics of writing this story and how I'm getting on. The last time I worked on it was in February of 2020. At that point, I actually went on a writing retreat, and Mythic War was one of the books I was working on while I was there. I spent a lot of time going through the existing chapters that I had from both Scion and Aeons, trying to tidy them up and fit them into this new overarching plotline. And then March rolled around, and honestly, I just put the entire story on the back burner. I didn't know when I was next going to get to it. Until, of course, we came back to this fantasy realization in October that I really wanted and needed to write some more fantasy. I had a lot of options at that point, honestly, but Mythic War made a lot of sense. I already had a lot of planning and groundwork for the story. I could pick it up quite quickly and get to work on it in NaNoWriMo, which is what I did. It wasn't my only story in Nano, it was kind of a secondary backup project, which you will know all about if you watched my Nano vlogs. But by the end of November, the book had got to 30,000 words. I'm thinking at this point that the final draft will be anywhere between 120,000 and 160,000 words. So to finish off this video, I wanted to talk about the things that are going well with this book and the things that are causing me difficulties. First of all, the characters have been a delight so far. Partly that's because some of these characters, especially the 4 who are in the magic school, have been in my head for a really long time. Aeons has been in development for years, but the characters have not changed very much in that time, so I feel like I know them pretty well. I'm also finding that I have an easier time both writing and understanding characters when they're in a multi-POV ensemble cast. I don't exactly know why this is. I think it's because I have more variety in the characters and because I contrast one to the next. They perhaps have more exaggerated backstories and personality traits so that each character is distinct, and that does make them easier to write, which is of course something I should remember when I'm writing books with a single POV, whether that's in first or third person. The plot is also going pretty well. I had a few wobbles over the plot during NaNoWriMo, which I did talk about in those vlogs. I was really struggling to get the structure of the early chapters of the book in the right order. I felt that some events were happening too quickly and some too slowly. However, I did move a lot of chapters around during NaNoWriMo and I'm much happier with the structure now. I think some of the early chapters do still need a bit of work because the first few were carried over from Aeons and I still don't think they are quite up to scratch. I'm pretty happy with everything I've added since though. I think the writing is pretty strong. I've got a strong sense of the characters and the world, and there's so much going on in the plot that I am loving layering in all these little hints of what is to come, and also the way that the 2 plot lines mesh together. Because so far, Pearl's plotline and the plotline in the school with the other 4 characters have only vaguely interconnected. They are going to connect with quite a bang later in the book, But for now, there is just a sense for the reader that these characters are going to come together, but the characters themselves don't know it yet. That is so much fun to write. So let's get on to the world. This is where things get a little bit more complicated. Mythic War is set in a very large setting, which is called Eterna, or the Eternal World. Now, think sort of Forgotten Realms or something like that. There are multiple continents, loads of different peoples and species, and many different stories taking part in this overall world that don't necessarily have anything to do with each other. The interesting thing is, I've been working on all these series simultaneously. I made the decision a few years ago that all the disparate fantasy stories I had in the planning stages, I wanted to try and bring them into the Eternal World. Now, this was very much made for marketing reasons because having a big world really helps to sell stories. If a reader reads one series, which then wraps up, they could easily go on to another series set in the same world and hopefully find just as much to enjoy there. But doing this has also made the overall world richer. Because I am trying to accommodate something like 6 different series at this point, I have had to build the world to accommodate all of them at once. That has fed into the magic system, into the geography, into the history of the world, and it has made the entire setting so much deeper and richer. I'm not saying this is something I would recommend to all writers, because this has been an ongoing process for probably 5 years now. It's very complicated, it's very slow, and it takes a lot of thought, but I have absolutely loved doing it. This is world building on a grand scale, and it's the biggest project really that I've ever attempted of this type, and I'm just loving it so much. This does give me one very specific problem in Mythic War though. The Eternal World has a magic system that is fairly well developed. It is built around 8 elements, as I call them in the books. We've got the traditional elements of fire, air, water and earth, but we've also got light and shadow, life and death. Now, the average magician in the Eternal World draws their power from very specific geographical points called lodes. Now, these are actually sites where 8 elemental dragons crash to Earth, and magicians are basically using the residual magic from the grave sites of these dragons. This puts obviously a strong constraint on the magic because you have to be in geographical proximity to a lode to be able to use that element of magic. So far, so good. But Aeons was always developed around the 4 main characters finding a new type of runic magic. This was the biggest difficulty I had in meshing the 2 stories together. I had to find a way to still have this discovery of the runes, but also have it work with the main magic system of the setting. I have found a way to do this. The 4 acolytes, as I call them in the book, who have discovered the runes, are essentially bypassing the 8 lodes. They are using magic directly from the elemental realms that the dragons originated from. The main difficulty though is in communicating all this to the reader. We've got an existing magic system already in play, and then we have got a big part of the plot taking place around the discovery of a new magic system. But the reader does not have chance to learn about the old magic system before the new one comes into existence. I wanted to be clear in the book that the runes are new, that they are quite revolutionary in the way magic could be performed in this world, but at the same time I don't want loads of backstory and introduction to get the old magic system across first. The discovery of the runes happens quite quickly in the first few chapters of the book, so I haven't had a lot of time to build up the old magic system for the reader first. Honestly, at this point, I've just done all I can do. I've written both the discovery of the runes and the explanation of the old magic system into the early part of the book, and I'm just going to have to wait and see what I think of that when I come to edit. I'm hoping it's clear enough, and I'm hoping it gives the right impression to readers, but honestly, I'm not going to know until someone else reads it, I think. I've spent a lot of time working on this book and working in this setting, and it's very difficult for me to know if what I'm putting down on paper will make sense to a reader because it's been in my head for so long. The expansive shared world does also throw up one last problem, and that is publishing schedules. One of the reasons I put Mythic War on the back burner earlier in the year is I didn't feel it was the best first Eternal World book to publish. I've got one standalone which I think would be a better fit, but I haven't written that standalone. I'm actually further along with Mythic War. So this is another tricky point that I haven't yet worked out. The standalone is a great introduction to the world. It's a bit more traditional high fantasy. It's a simpler plot with equally great characters who I love very much. And it does introduce a lot of important concepts around the magic and history of this world. Having said that, it's not a direct prequel to Mythic War. It actually has no bearing on Mythic War at all, which means that Mythic War does still need to stand on its own. Even if I publish the standalone first, there is no guarantee that readers are going to actually read it first. I still haven't made any firm decisions on the publishing schedule. There is every chance that something else will come out before Mythic War in this setting, but I am also very aware that Mythic War just has to work as its own book. So this video is getting incredibly long, which I knew it would do because there's so much to talk about here. I want to finish by very quickly talking about my next steps. As I said, I've reached 30,000 words. I have a very rough outline for the rest of the book. Actually, I think calling it an outline is probably a bit ambitious. It is a bunch of notes that give me a very vague idea of where the story is going next. So, of course, my next steps are number one, to keep drafting. I'm kind of developing each chapter as I go, then writing it, and continually adding to the outlining process and working out where I want the story to go. It's quite slow. There is a lot to think about and a lot to take into consideration every time I plan out a new chapter. But because I don't really have a firm outline, this is working better for me than trying to plan out everything in advance. But that is where I am going to leave this video for today. Thank you for following along on this journey with me. It has been already much longer than I anticipated, and I am barely into the drafting process at all. I love this story and this world though, and it has been absolutely fascinating for me to document this on video. Next time I will hopefully do a flip through of that notebook I talked about to go into more detail about my thought processes for each part of the story. You'll be able to see the rather chaotic way my mind works when I am planning out a book. In the meantime though, I will keep writing, and I hope you are too. I'll see you next time.